Hello, everyone. Beck Kasimov here with Michael Canton, and we're starting our podcast about men and how we as men can find our ways in the modern society and how we deal with the challenges of life that we're encountering right now. I think that's a very interesting topic. There is a big question that we're seeing that's coming from our clients, and we see online a lot of conversation. What does it mean to be a man in a modern society? How to find our identity as a man. And today I invited my friend and co-host, Michael Canton. How are you today?
I'm great, man. I got a workout in this morning and yeah, feeling good.
This podcast is going to be about men out there and the problems that they're dealing. So I want to say our audience, we're going to do a short introduction about us, and then I promise you, we're going to jump in right into the topic that we want to talk about it. And today's topic is the power of man's vulnerability and what does it mean to be vulnerable?
Mm.
And is it okay to be vulnerable in our society?
Great.
Michael, why don't you do a short introduction about yourself?
Cool. So my name is Michael Canton. I'm a licensed professional clinical counselor. I'm also a coach. I coach men and women. But my passion is working with men and also bringing spirituality and holistic health in the mix for everyone. I'm also an energy worker and qigong instructor.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. My name is Beck Kasimov. I am an entrepreneur. I run several businesses, but at the same time, I do coach men and women as one of my businesses. And I'm also big into the spirituality. I do study Sufism and also Taoism. That's where I met Michael in one of our Taoist Qigong camps. And I work with men and help them coach them how to find balance and harmony in their relationships. Quite often there are these questions arise from men how to find their place in this world. So this is going to be the topic of today's conversation. I have a black belt in Aikido. I practice martial arts. So that's it. I guess we can jump into our conversation. Michael, what is vulnerability? And what does it mean for a man to be vulnerable in modern society?
Man, yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and um, to me, vulnerability is being authentic, being authentically you in the moment, and um, being clear in yourself what is going on in you, right?
Mhm.
We were talking about the name of this podcast, um, masculine alchemy, right? And
Right.
um, first, it's like just being aware of like what's going on in me, what's going on with my emotions from moment to moment, my thoughts, my fears, my aspirations, all of it, the whole gamut, and what are in my needs, and just being aware of all of that within, and then um, owning it, right? And and I think when we talk about vulnerability, it's an interface of we're being vulnerable to whom, to somebody else, to the outward world, or to others, right? So um, it's letting down the mask, the guard, the armor, and just being real in the moment.
Right.
And there's a confusion, around vulnerability, because I think a lot of people think or equate vulnerability with weakness,
That's
and
right.
that's just that's just not the same thing, you know.
Yeah, I grew up in the former Soviet Union, with a very strong macho culture around me, and vulnerability definitely was considered to be a weakness. Where I was told when I was growing up, and if I start crying for whatever reason, they'd say, "Come on, man, man up, you're a man. Boys don't cry,"
Right.
and I believe that made me shut down part of my emotions internally. And so I could not get in touch with truly who you are because we as human beings, we have a spectrum of emotions. There is no good and no bad. It's just something that's coming through. And only years later, I've learned how to deal with my emotions and felt it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to feel certain emotions. It's okay to cry as a man when I'm experiencing or going through kind of challenging situations or have to deal with something. So I think that's a very important issue that a lot of men struggling nowadays. Are we allowed? Do we have a permission to be vulnerable in a modern society? I used to think, oh, how will I look like in the eyes of others? They're going to think I'm weak. I'm not good enough. I'm not strong enough. And this whole thing, like then I had to put up a face, a facade. It still didn't make me happy because it was the forced image of me that I was putting on that was not authentic me, because I was not experiencing this emotion. And I believe this is the big problem with men today because they want to be vulnerable, experience that vulnerability, and because they can't or they don't allow themselves, that's where the depression comes, from like suppressing those emotions. What do you see as a therapist when you're working with people? How does that come through for you?
Yeah, man, the first thing that came to mind is addiction.
Oh,
So we're looking um a lot of us that deal with difficult emotions that we don't want to feel. We're running to things, drugs, alcohol, porn, food, um, TV, right? Just something to numb us and shift our attention away from the emotion and being vulnerable in ourselves to something that can make us feel good quickly. And so I see that a lot in the work that I do with people, and it's like not their fault, right? It's just they are gravitating to something at some point in their life to help them numb the pain and deal with the discomfort, and then it just becomes a habit and a way of life, and they're not really dealing with what happened that caused the emotions, or they haven't learned how to um, feel and manage the emotions in a way that is empowering and allows the emotions to move through you or transform. Um, so there's a lot of education involved in this. You know?
yeah. And something struck me when you said, people run to addiction when they can't fully experience their emotions. I've watched this fascinating TED talk about the roots of addiction. Addiction is the kind of form of person who can't create connection in the world. He creates a connection to through that addiction to whatever he's addicted to. So that's a very interesting and fascinating concept. And he gives an example of U.S. soldiers who came back from the Vietnam War, and a lot of them were on drugs during the war because he had to deal with so much trauma, right? And when they came back, everybody was horrified and said, "We're going to have so many addicted men." But what happened once they came back, a lot of them dropped it. Only very small percentage stayed addicted to that. And the main reason was they were able to develop healthy relationships in their lives once they came back, whether it was their family, their parents, their friends. So that allowed them, there was something bigger, in their life that allowed them to step away from addiction and create healthy relationship and attachments. Because I think addiction is an attachment, and maybe that addiction's when the emotion that you could not experience, Like if like it's with food, I notice when I'm stressed, I start stress eating. It's the way of me dealing with unprocessed emotion in me. And for someone, it's alcohol. For somebody else, it's drugs. For somebody else, it's porn. And I think those unprocessed emotions, there's something that we're not allowed to experience, then it takes the form of addiction. I think you came like on a very good point here. I think that's why it's very important for us as men to experience those emotions so we don't have to suppress it and it does not take the form of the addiction.
That's right. Yeah. The saying, feeling is healing.
Yeah.
And, um, and, you kind of touched on it before too. It's emotions, are just here, right? And our bodies, our nervous systems, feel them come in. We notice sensations in our body. It could be tension. It could be like a fluttering feeling or a nauseous feeling. Um, and the emotions, we can kind of tune in, like, okay, am I feeling grief, sadness, anger, right? Fear, jealousy. Um, and if we can begin to observe them and feel them
Hmm.
simultaneously, um, and trust the process of them, like just living for a short time and kind of coming through us, and not like you're talking, use the word suppression, and um, a lot of times it's like breathing and allowing ourselves to be really soft in our like front of the body and
Right.
feel it, um, and doing movements, to get it to move through too. So I mean,
Right.
there's a lot of ways to go about it. And it's when I work with people, I'm teaching them and guiding them through some of these different processes.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of because we're gonna definitely focus in a little bit further down in our conversation about the ways how to deal with that, right? From what of our experience of coaching and the work that we're doing with people. But it's very interesting. Like I look into my relationship in my family with my wife, and the most powerful connections I ever experienced, it's the times when I'm vulnerable.
Hmm.
Usually I catch myself, I'm a man, right? I'm a macho, I have everything under control. But I'm not, and we as humans, we're not in control of a lot of things, right? Things happen, lives, and then we experience the setbacks, we fall down right into our face, and then we don't feel so powerful at all. But I've noticed this habit of always putting up this, oh yeah, yeah, no, no, I have everything under control, I'm a powerful guy, I got it. But then my wife gave me feedback, the most powerful connections we ever had when I actually dropped my guard.
Hmm.
I opened up myself and I shared that pain or the struggle that I'm going through. And then she can relate to that and understand. And this is where a connection happened. And it's very interesting. Like a lot of people say they can, I don't know if the underdog theory is going to work here, but like why people love the underdogs because they see someone struggling. They're not the first, right? But they experience the emotions that struggle go through. People can relate into others who are going through struggles because they see themselves in that person or in that hero, right? And I think this is the thing that's very important because they see the reflections of themselves. I mean, if someone has everything under control and he's cool, he has a huge house, he has a big business, is like drives the most expensive car, has the next very beautiful woman next to him, you can't relate to that guy because that's not your life. That's not how life for most of the men.
Right.
Men go to work. We deal with challenges at work. We come home. We deal with challenges at home with our family. Then there's you have to make a living, the financial challenges, and then if someone is in relationship, even not in family, you have to deal with that relationship. Am I in a secure form of relationship? Or a lot of men going around, they want to get on a date, but it takes courage and guts to get and connect with the girl. I don't know how it's for others. That's how it was for me. It's not easy task. It's like I was afraid, I was not so confident of myself. you know. You
Yeah,
know, I did not fit that the image of a super guy, who can like pick up babes right and left. No, it's like I failed down into my face many times. But it took learning, and understanding and connecting with people so that people can relate to you and then you can build a relationship, right?
totally, man. Yeah, yeah. The word connection is key there, and that's in my own life. That's um, what I've been learning is the more that I can be real and connect with people, um, then then energy moves and flow happens, um, and it's like okay, we don't have to be perfect, and I'm a recovering perfectionist. I say, I mean, most of my life I was like, okay, I gotta like be perfect. I gotta, do this right, do that right. And I think that kind of plays into what you're saying, like you wanting to demonstrate or show a facade of everything's all good, and inwardly there's stuff going on, but not wanting to share it. And the fact that your wife gave you that feedback is awesome, and that's what's the beauty of relationship is. We get feedback, pretty instantaneously. you know
Yeah, and I think having a connection. So basically, if I, as a guy, embrace my emotions,
Mhm.
perfect or imperfect, and comfortable with them and understand that's part of me, that makes others to be comfortable with them too because they see my humanity, not some facade cool guy that we're trying to put. And I know the society has this high demands on us. We have these images of how men should be, and I think this is very toxic. That's what creates toxic masculinity because there are these false expectations. And as a man, we have to rewrite. And I think we're going to keep talking about these things in our podcast. What does it mean, to be a man in the modern world? How to find this new identity, new masculinity. And I'll be honest, we're not the guys who know the answers. No, we like going through this
We're
life and
exploring.
learning ourselves, right? Through like,
We're explorers.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, explorers. So that's why we're inviting men to join our conversation and ask questions. If you have questions regarding this, because that's what it is. And but I want to also caution. I think there is a clear distinction has to be between embracing vulnerability and then, but also falling into the victimhood. Because there has to be clear distinction because some people might think if man comes up and becomes like a victim to something, then he thinks, oh, I'm being vulnerable. But that's, I think, very like a different thing. And I don't think a lot of people like dealing with other people's victimhood, right? It's like, what do you think, about victimhood? So how is that different?
Yeah, no, this is a huge distinction. I've learned this myself in my own life.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
Um,
please share.
yeah, yeah. I mean, growing up and into adulthood, my concept of it was to be totally transparent of all the thoughts and all the feelings I'm having as I'm having them, almost like I'm bleeding out, like to
Right.
somebody. And I'm like, oh, I'm in touch with my emotions. I'm feeling them. I'm super sensitive to them. I'm aware. And if I can have friendships and uh, relationships with women, where I'm sharing all that vulnerably, then I'm fully expressed, right? And I quickly learned that that's not exactly it. And in fact, that pushes people away, and that keeps you in the wound of whatever you're going through. Um, and and then as we grow older, even, we have relationships, we have situations that come up with our partner or friends or coworkers or what have you. And it old stuff from, childhood and adolescence, we get triggered in the moment now, and we get super reactive, emotionally reactive. And sharing the emotional reactivity in the moment isn't vulnerable either. That's not.
No,
Uh,
no.
and so, what I've learned is that as men, and for me myself, learning to take responsibility for the emotions that come up, for the past trauma that's triggered, um, and learning to embrace it, feel it, hold it, and work with it until it's resolved or somewhat resolved enough to then vulnerably share, um, with clarity what's going on, but doing so in just, a summary.
Right.
Not all the things that are going on within you. And so summarizing it, but doing so with just an open heart, like, hey, this is what's going on for me. This is why I reacted this way, or this is what I've been like dealing with. Another person can handle that. It's not a emotional dump on somebody. It's more of a sharing at that point.
Yeah, I like the word the emotional dump because that's what happens, right? Because if you want to be a vulnerable, it does not mean you dump your emotions onto others. Yes, you experience your emotions, you embrace them, but to share these emotions, you need to have a safe space where you can do that because you're that in a place of vulnerability and openness. Yes, you can share sometimes when you go through something, but it doesn't mean you become a victim and say, hey, this happened to me, and then you dump those emotions into others. That's not how it works. Sharing and dumping, it's kind of a little bit it's a very thin line, like that, but that's why we have to be really careful because I've seen both cases. Like there were cases that men would share something, they would be crying and stuff, and it would be so powerful where this man comes from the place of vulnerability, and then there would be other men who also would be crying, but there would be this conversation of victimhood underlying context. So it was such a victimhood, that's a little bit different. And I'm still contemplating on that, how to work with this, concept, and how to experience that vulnerability, on how to share it. And I think the biggest part is managing and owning those emotions, not being afraid, not rejecting those emotions, saying that's bad or no, those are your emotions, you're experiencing it. Because victimhood comes from a place, if you look at it as a distinction, I can't do anything, these things are done to me or happen to me. Because in a victimhood, you don't have a power.
Mm.
Someone or something does this to you. But with a place of power and responsibility, when we embrace those emotions, you say, yes, I'm experiencing that and I'm in control of that. I take responsibility for that. And then it turns into the power in the so called mastery, right? And then you work with that emotion and deal with it or a situation and how you learn how to manage it, basically. I think that would be a very interesting point about dealing with the uh, vulnerability versus victimhood. I think it's. I'm glad that we clarified this thing because I think it's important, And so, okay, so what do you come across when you work with men? My next question would be, how do societal expectations empower or distort the the true masculinity and the place of vulnerability in it? Do you have any experience with that? So this is something I would like to explore.
Yeah, I mean, when I hear you talk about that, I'm thinking about social conditioning, through TV, movies, um, expectations of family members, in the families we grew up in, um, expectations, from, yeah, all kinds of media. And, it's a huge topic, actually, because we could go on about ways in which this has kind of come down the pipeline, probably over, centuries.
Right.
And but also in the modern era, um and I even think that there's a um an agenda to demasculinize men. And but maybe that's for another
Yeah,
episode.
that's going to be for another
Yeah.
conversation, maybe. But what I'm seeing, as you said, social conditioning first. When we grow up with certain expectations that's set on us as men,
Mhm.
and then whether like I came from one country and moved to United States, right? And then there are different kinds of expectations from men. It's the standards and rules, they change. There are some in good, a lot of things in good ways, but some also not good ways. Then you mentioned how did you say demasculation, right?
Demasculinize, yeah.
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 So and I think that brings men into the state of confusion because I've been going through certain forums when men talk about these questions. It creates a confusion for a lot of men because they can't live in the old ways, but there are also no clear pathways in a modern society. What does it mean to be a man?
Mhm.
Right? So a lot of time they called out for so-called toxic masculinity. And I think we're going to talk about toxic masculinity, what it is, in our one of our next conversations,
Mm.
and how this can be changed. But I think because it's the first thing, being vulnerable was not a good thing. I think it still confuses a lot of men, and we have to rewrite it. How we see masculinity in today's world. So let's talk about the tools as a man we can use to deal with that.
Yeah. I would like to just say something to what you
Mm-hmm.
just shared. Um, you know, I'm not a fan of the term toxic masculinity.
Uh
Um,
huh.
I look at it as um, either like a wounded masculine. There's trauma, there's wounds,
Right.
um, and then there's immaturity as well. Just not really understanding and getting and maturing. Maturing yet, and so a lot of times, young guys, they're wild, right? Like, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of testosterone, there's a lot of um, kind of seeing what other people are doing and just kind of trying to portray this version of what is the ultimate.
Right.
And but it's not really grounded in a healthy way. It's not being centered, in your body, mind, and heart and spirit. It's it's a little more chaotic. So um I just wanted to make that point, and yeah, well, I'm sure we'll talk about it in another episode, but I wanted to mention that. And um so I mean, that pivoting that point is, it's first demonstrating what being a healthy man is. Um, in therapy, we call it psychoeducation, which
Psychology. Yeah.
so it's basically just educating the client about how to manage your emotions, how to communicate non-violently, you know, um, and ways to center yourself, ground yourself when the emotions are going. Um, like even before our recording this, we dropped into a short meditation, and that's very centering, very grounding, um, and we're opening ourselves to the flow of life.
Yeah.
And um, I think a lot of times as men, we're trying to make things happen and push and plan and like action, and there's definitely times for that um daily, you know,
Mhm.
right? But there's also time to receive and to listen and to tune in to our own inner guidance on how to proceed. And that's a little bit more of the feminine energy, I would
Yeah,
say.
that we also need to bring in, right? Because I think we as human beings, externally male, internally is female, you know? Woman, she's externally feminine, but internally she has a masculine side in her. We should not forget that we have two sides in us. So only trying to become a masculine, we can live, it's like trying to live with one side of your body. And I think that's an important distinction for men to understand. We have to, for the different situations in our life, we need to bring different parts of ourselves. Yes, sometimes we need, so if we take the concept of yin and yang, yang is a masculine side of us. We should bring in the yang masculine side of us to deal with certain problems. But sometimes in the different situations, we need to bring yin side of the, feminine side of us to deal, because we have to be embracing, we have to be loving, right? It's not usually considered to be very masculine, attributes, but that's the true masculine, that embraces the both sides. That's what we need to bring in into our life, right? And that's it's gonna be. What do you do when you're in meditation? You become receptive. You bring forth your feminine side. You know, what happens when we listen instead of trying to push our own agenda and thought? It's we're becoming feminine and receptive again. We're opening up again to somebody else's opinion. And I think same way with vulnerability, lack of vulnerability, it means we are not taught to bring forth our feminine side and embrace certain things, instead of just rejecting them and put in suppressing them into our subconscious. And I think so-called toxic masculinity uh, comes forward when they people are numb and don't experience certain emotions themselves, so they feel it's okay to hurt somebody or say something that can hurt other person, because they cannot relate to those feelings because those feelings are suppressed in them. I think that's a very kind of important part of this conversation. So, um, so let's talk about how we can work with vulnerability. And I believe like one of the things where we can start with is how we as a man can create a safe space where we can share our experiences, struggles, and strength without fear of judgment. Because I believe a lot of men don't feel safe to share their vulnerabilities, you know, and how to say, they cannot be authentic, because authenticity means to experiencing all your emotions. So I think for that purpose, the men's group, where men can freely sit down and have these conversations, are very important. Because unfortunately, growing up, when the boys get together, they make like talk about all kinds of stuff, cars, movies, make not very good jokes about girls. It's like it's like this is not I felt was the true experience of being a masculine, being bodies. Though they make those jokes, the sex jokes or whatever kind of jokes. I went through that. I know that, right? But then I remember when I came to the U.S. in one of the leadership training companies, they hosted um, divine masculine workshop. They called it, I think, masculinity workshop. And I'll never forget, it was so powerful for me. Why? Because I was able to sit down with other men and have a conversation that I wanted to have for so many years. and I could not because of the certain stigma or patterns through which I lived and experienced my masculinity. It's the first time I was able to talk about myself as a man, my struggles, my problems, and also talk how to truly relate, to my feminine partner, to my wife, and the struggles that I go through. We talked about everything, family relationships, sexuality, the struggles we go through. And I was very relaxed because I felt okay to experience certain emotions.
Right on, man.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, like you had the container was created for you to
Hmm.
be able to have that experience of opening up. And that's what the men's groups do, right? Like,
Right.
I've hosted my own men's circle and also a men's program. I've also been a participant in others men's work containers. So, and what's great about them is that we create the sacred space for learning and for sharing, for being vulnerable,
Right.
letting it down, and um, and there's ground rules for that, so we keep it a safe space for that. And that's what, like, I'm excited about doing in this work, is because a lot of men don't have that. They haven't had the opportunity. They haven't had somebody say, hey, no, bring it, bring everything that you want to bring to this group. And you're allowed to bring it all. And who gets
And
that in,
share it.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So that's great. And I think the next step that I want to talk about it is self-compassion.
mm,
So sometimes I feel I push myself too hard and I don't acknowledge myself, I always like, oh, you have to this goal, you have to do this and that, And I was like, and it's always chasing another goal. Sometimes as a man, I feel I should stop and say, hey, acknowledge myself for who I am, for the hard work I've done, you
mm,
know, like experience that self love and acknowledgement
mm,
in a true way. And every day I do this meditation, the gratitude meditations before I fall asleep,
mm.
acknowledge myself and thank myself for the things that I've done in my day during the day. I take account of everything and then acknowledge others, like mentally in my meditation for what's during the day, like
Mm.
what happened in the interaction of the day. I think this is my meditation before I go to sleep, content. But I think the number one, it starts sometimes chasing another goal that we set in our life and earning another $1 million. We
Yeah.
forget about ourselves, you know. So, and it's like a gratitude towards ourselves, basically.
Yeah, that's just a huge point, because a lot of times we don't reflect. I mean, you're reflecting at the end of the day on your day, and about
Right.
taking account for uh, what to be grateful for, what awesome stuff is going on in your life. Um, and even some of the probably the mundane things, like, you know,
Mm.
I have shelter, I have food, like
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a car, like I have family, it's like that's and that's what I tell a lot of people, not just men but also women too. If they're struggling with their feeling depressed, or feeling anxious about things, or fearful, it's like, start with a gratitude practice. It just starts to transform your mind, and where your mind goes, energy flows, right? So if you go towards what you're grateful for, you start to feel that chemistry in your body, um, and of gratitude,
Right.
and your mind starts to look for things daily, what you're grateful for.
Yeah, yeah. And I believe I'll never forget when I was like chasing another thing and goal, in my life, another project that I wanted to do. I was so frustrated. And I said, this is life is crazy. I can't reach my goal. Then I just sat down and meditated. And I
Mm,
looked back. And as I said, let me find something to be grateful for right now that I have in my life.
mm,
And it was very powerful. When I looked back, I looked back at me when I was a young man in college. And then I realized I had never dared even to imagine that I would have things that I have right now.
mm,
That seemed unreachable to me. So that was very powerful. And I said, oh my God, by chasing another goal, I forgot what I have right now, what I've already achieved, and what's already there. And I think that's a great point about, being grateful on what we have, in our days right now. Okay, shifting to the next tool, I think we can share being courageous. What does that mean? Does that mean is not too afraid to share something, not too afraid for me to share something that I'm afraid to say because I would come across weak, you know, and have that conversation because I've realized in some examples where I was afraid to share something because I thought I would come across that I'm a loser, and that's the usual conversation I have in my head. Hey, it's like if they're gonna hear that I fail here, they're gonna think I'm such a loser. That's once I start sharing this in the safe place, this conversations and the struggle I'm going through, it took me some courage. I had to muster up some courage to share it. The interesting part was that group helped me to find a solution to the
mm.
problem that I was struggling with. And
Yeah,
and I think this is the secret, right? You look for help, but you get to share that struggle that you're going through.
yeah, yeah. These topics intertwine so amazingly.
Mm-hmm.
Because you just mentioned a minute ago about having self-compassion, which also known as self-acceptance,
Mm-hmm.
self-love. And I think this is an important point about that before we talk more about this is that um, I did some research around depression, and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times for women it's their lack of self-love and self-acceptance that is heavily contributing to their depressed mood.
Mm-hmm.
For men, though, it's more about learned helplessness. So they're like in kind of a victim space. They feel disempowered
Right.
and they're feeling helpless, and there's people around them that are kind of mirroring that and saying, yeah, you kind of got a raw deal, and oh, and it's kind of babying him a little bit, right? And then and he's staying in that victim mentality and doesn't feel like he can have the courage to step forward and do something with purpose. And a lot, especially for men, getting out of a depressed mood is about taking action and engaging in your purpose in life. Um, and yes, have self compassion, self love along the way because we're going to make mistakes like
Yeah.
crazy as we're on our path and on our purpose, right? So we have to learn to be compassionate towards ourselves.
Yeah.
Um, we mess up,
So to men and gentlemen out there, we're all going to screw up, and we know that. We're gonna fall and fail flat onto our faces right into the dirt. We're not gonna look pretty. You know
Yeah,
what? The only difference between the winners and losers, that the winners just get up and keep going, and the losers they said, no, 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 I'm done. I think that's the only difference where we should understand, and that's where self-compassion is very important. You going for it. That's very important part. That's where the acknowledgement should come from. You know. So, okay, let's slowly move into our next, tool maybe that we can share. Um, Share compassion with others. I think I know that I'm going through certain challenges. I know what it takes to build something, to create something, how to keep a good, healthy relationship. And if I see somebody struggling, I will go and support that guy. Why?
Mhm.
Because somebody else did that for me before. And I know by serving others and supporting in the best way I can, I'm also supporting myself because I'm spreading that compassion. I
Yeah.
think in our society, we are like so self absorbed in our problems, we forget about others. And I think if, let's say, we are in a group like men's group, right? Being compassionate towards each other, that's a number one rule, and being compassionate to people around us, whom we see, for example, going through that struggle. I think that's very important. But being compassionate with the actions in it, just don't be quiet thinking, oh, it's none of my business, it's going to be intrusion, Yeah, go out and ask a question. Hey, do you need my support? And if they're open to it, right, say, okay.
Yeah.
I think that's because you're acknowledging their vulnerability. And for me, I'll never forget this story. When I was young man, I had this unrequited love, right? And this girl I fell in love with, she would like had nothing towards me. And I'll never forget one of my close friends, he came to me that day and he hugged me and said, "It's okay, man. You will be fine. I know it hurts right now, very deep, but you
Mm.
will be okay." And he grabbed me by the shoulder and walked with me next to me. I will never forget that. He's
Yeah.
just one act of compassion was so powerful, it stayed with me for the rest of my life. And I'm okay. Those things are gonna pass, things happen, relationship come and go, but that stayed. I don't even remember what girl I was in love with at the time, but I remember that situation, because I was like, wow, this is so powerful. This is the, compassion in action.
Yeah, and that was from your friend who's a man,
Right,
and that was how he was able to show support for you. And yeah, as men, we can do that. We have so many gifts and so much power to bring healing and um, love and you know providing and providing. It can be financial, but it can also
right,
be providing presence,
right,
providing a doorway to experience life in a very trustable, meaningful, grounded way that children and women maybe and other guys may need in a moment, right? And so
right,
the more that we are practicing um, taking care of ourselves, our bodies, our emotions, taking care of ourselves spiritually, we open the doorway to be that presence for others. And I mean, I've had an experience recently providing my gifts, and I'm hearing back now. I don't know if you can hear that, but providing my gifts, and it fills me up when I do that. I don't feel like I need anything from anybody when I'm providing my gifts to others in
Mhm.
service. So
Yeah,
beautiful.
great. So, and now we're gonna go to our next part is accountability and growth.
Yeah.
So, what does that mean for me personally? Is taking responsibility for my actions
Mm.
and taking even responsibility for the things that's happening to me. Because once you take accountability and responsibility, you're not a victim to that conversation, a situation, or relationship that gives me, if I'm that gives me power to change it. And then I become a master. Whatever difficult situation I am, I ask myself a first question. So, how did I cause it? What's my responsibility and part in it? And that opens the door for the next step. How can I change it? Right? And then when I see things, when I mess up, the other part of this, taking accountability, what do I do to change that? Let's say I was like an asshole to someone, to my wife in relationship. I said something that I should not have said. Very simple. I take responsibility. I go and clear up uh, with my wife, with a friend, whoever that situation is with. Because I've noticed in the relationship, everybody wants to be right. I want to be right. So I don't want to be the first one to come and say and take responsibility for what I've created. I expect others to do that. And I think as a man, our responsibility is to take accountability of our part on the situation that happened, and then step in and say, hey, I'm sorry, or whatever way you need to resolve that situation. Because I've seen how this ego driven situations, I don't want to apologize, I'm right, not seeing their part in the situation really destroyed partnerships and relationships. And this is one of the hardest one. I'll be honest. Sometimes when I'm so pissed because of certain situation, I have a hard time, taking responsibility and going the clearing up the situation. And then also I want to give this tool. What does it mean to clear up? Is to connect to that person that situation happened with, take responsibility and say, hey, look, this part is on me or this is on me. I'm sorry, and I take responsibility on this part. And when I'm open and vulnerable, accepting, my part in this situation, it kind of opens up the other person too. They go like, wow, you know? And then very often situation is resolved. Even let's say that person is an asshole and don't want to deal with you at all, or just not in a place where they want to, deal with that and clear the situation. I know at least I'm clear on my side. I took responsibility.
Yeah.
And I think taking responsibility in this way is another important step, how to dissolve the situation of being a man. And this takes a power of vulnerability to be able to
Yes.
accept responsibility.
That is the main quality there is like we're owning our misstep, and it can be confusing. I've been through it myself, even recently, and sometimes it's disorienting that like wait a minute, like did I do something wrong? And then you're like, oh yeah, I guess I made a mistake, or I saw something and reacted in a way that was unloving and incorrect and hurtful. And taking time to self-assess, talk with
Hmm.
coach, talk with a counselor or therapist, talk with a trusted friend, men friend, and get some clarity and see and get some feedback on like, okay, where what was I doing here, and where did my reaction come from, and taking ownership like that and coming to peace with it, and then vulnerably going to someone and say, hey, I'm sorry, I messed up here. That is vulnerable. And also what you said is like, how can you then do something different in the future, um, to correct it. And um, that's the power that we have, and we can help each other do that.
Right. Yeah. Wonderful. And that brings us to the our last step of our conversation, I think. Embracing and experiencing our own emotions.
Mm,
So I used to stuff my emotions before, but very early on, when I started practicing meditation, I've learned presencing myself to what I'm experiencing right now. If I'm in anger, I experience that anger. If I'm in sadness, I experience that sadness. And to think about any emotion, it's not constant once it experiences. It starts decreasing once you start processing it through experiencing. A lot of time, the I believe the problem with angry man, it's the matter of not experiencing emotion. It's matter of suppressing that emotion. If men learn how to create a safe space for themselves to experience their emotions alone, and that's where meditation and therapy is a good thing, right? That's what I do. If I'm angry, I just close myself in the room. I walk, I breathe, I can take a pillow, I punch it, I cry, I experience that emotion. I don't let it control me. And suppression, there is a saying one of my coaches used to say, what you resist persist. Every time if I, suppress my emotions, it gets bigger. Like pay attention, gentlemen, in your life. If something is huge, is overtaking you, I guarantee you're on some level, you're trying to suppress it. So, wholeheartedly embracing that emotion, that feeling, living it, creating a safe space where you individually can experience it. Somebody goes to gym, somebody punches a bag, somebody punches a pillow. Sometimes going to room and crying in the dark room, it's like letting those emotions come through. And I think that's one of the most
Making
important ones.
sounds, making sounds.
Making sounds.
That's like it's pre-verbal,
Yeah.
and sometimes it's not about the words we need to say. A lot of times as guys, we think we gotta set the record straight, we gotta tell them what we think. Sometimes it's better just to be quiet in terms of communicating right now because we're angry, and do what you said to take care of it, and also make sounds that get that guttural emotion out of you, so you're clearing it.
Right.
And I'm a big proponent of, once you're clearing that energy, you want to refill yourself with an energy that you want to set the tone for moving forward, like, calmness or peace, um, trustworthiness, or whatever.
Well, I believe there is no emptiness anywhere. So once you release something, it fills up with something else. And when you're in a meditation and experience it, then you can bring forth your internal presence. It's, as you said, whether it's a love or gratitude, but we need to clean our house first. Once we clean our house,
Yeah.
then those emotions, the ones we cultivate, can come through. And we know if we're not experiencing certain emotion, it means there is something else that not letting that emotion come through. So yeah, we can go on and on about this. Is an amazing topic, but I think we can stop here.
Sounds good.
It was great, and to our listeners, we're going to continue these conversations with Michael. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel. And please
Shoot,
join us in our conversations, leave comments,
share
and
with a man that might benefit, whether it's a friend or just another compadre of yours. And we want to just keep these discussions going.
yeah, perfect. All right.
Yeah,
Thank you,
and
Michael.
you're welcome. And Beck, do you want to let guys know where they can find you? And
Yeah, co-createwith1.com is my website. You're welcome to check out my website and subscribe to our channel. And what's where they can find you, Michael?
sacred-psychotherapy.com.
Awesome. Thank you. See you guys soon.
All right, ciao.